So let's go ahead and begin. Welcome everybody. This is the Utah Early Learning Standards Standard Implementation Training for Social Studies. As Jamie mentioned before this morning, the intention of this training is really for administrators and coaches or other people who do trainings in your program to really become very familiar with the standards, as well as to help plan for and then provide professional development on, in this case, the new social studies standards in your program. So if this is not the training that you're anticipating, yeah, please keep that in mind. We do have the roadshow trainings, which are more directed towards teaching staff. Okay, let's go ahead and jump in and begin. Let's do a bit of a pre-assessment type of thing here. As we're starting off, on the next slide in Nearpod, I would like you to enter into the collaboration board what's one activity you have used or observed to teach social studies skills in early learning classrooms. So we'll go here and go ahead and just take a moment. Think about what you have either done or what you have observed to teach social studies skills in early learning classrooms. Okay, great. They're starting to show up. They're starting to come in. Maps of the neighborhood around the school. Wonderful. I think I'll give you a chance to enter them before we jump in and start talking about them. So. Okay. Okay, so yeah, we're getting quite a few good responses. Just to talk about some of these, have students voting on activities, voting on songs, what song you want to sing today, what activity you want to do outside. Those are all great opportunities that people have for teaching social studies. Say the Pledge of Allegiance, talking about family information, home, culture, social skills, teaching social skills specifically to encourage getting along and understanding. Learning to say hello in different languages. That's a great one to talk about the global community. Let's see. Share family information, culture, information about recycling, family unit community helpers, social skills. Wonderful. Telling all about me posters about their families. Wonderful. Okay, great, thanks. Ideas for really getting people to think about who they are and their role in the broader community, whether it's in the classroom or the larger community, the neighborhood, the city, state, are all wonderful ideas of how to teach social studies skills. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the objectives for today. Here's what I hope to accomplish with this training. First off is to identify the 8 strands of the Utah Core Standards for Early Learning, specifically social studies. And hopefully you've all had a chance to do the pre-assignment that was in the link that was sent out from Midas earlier this week. Because we're not going to spend too much time talking about the standards. We will do a little bit of that later on, but I hope that you've had a chance to get in and kind of wade around in the standards so you have a good familiarity with them so far. We will touch on that, as I mentioned, but it's more to have that broader knowledge. The second thing is identify strategies to prepare teachers to teach and assess development in social studies. So basically thinking about how you will prepare and then present professional development to your staff. Identify resources to use to create training that meets the needs of teachers. And then the last thing is learn how to support teachers with intentional and differentiated instruction to support students in meeting social studies early learning standards. So what we will do to explore today, first is understanding the discipline of social studies, kind of the bigger picture and where the standards fit into that bigger picture of the field of social studies. We'll talk about what's new in the social studies, to this, the new standards that were developed and approved by the state board in May. I can say in May of last year. It makes it sound longer, but it's relatively recently still. And then explore how you'll use this information to prepare and present professional development. So with that in mind, I'd like to jump into helping solve a mystery. And I apologize if any of you attended my session in the preschool workshop last week. As I was preparing for that workshop, there was a lot of cross-pollination of ideas relating to social studies and what I was talking about with stress and children in the classroom. So I thought I'd begin here, and yeah, if you were in the session last week, at least some of the possible answers to this mystery. But if not, well, come along and help me solve this mystery. One of my first jobs was as a researcher. I was a research scientist looking at classroom quality in early education settings. And I was specifically interested in the experience of children's stress in early learning classrooms, specifically relating to things like social development, social interactions, relationships with teachers, how developmentally appropriate the classroom was. And one of the things that I found that really kind of drove a lot of the questions that I asked was around this interesting phenomenon relating to one of the common ways that we use to test physiological stress, cortisol levels. This picture here, just a little context, this is going back quite a few years. The little child on the right holding up the little plastic vial with the yellow tube in it, that's my son who turns 25 next month. So yeah, this is when he was in preschool. He was one of my guinea pigs as I was developing some of my research. But what I would do is I would collect saliva samples from children in their classroom and then in activities outside of their classroom to look at how the classroom environment related to stress hormones. But here's where the mystery comes in. Okay, so under normal conditions, our cortisol levels follow a typical and predictable pattern across the day. You'll notice here in this picture, there's this big spike, this increase in the early morning hours. It peaks around, you can see around 7 o'clock, typically about the time that people wake up. And then cortisol levels decrease across the day from morning to evening. There's some reasons for that. Aside from being an indicator of stress, cortisol is really important for normal body functioning. This is what helps break down stored energy in our body into usable energy. So the idea here is that this morning spike in cortisol is our body's way of releasing some of the stored energy that we have so that we're rested and invigorated, ready to attack the day. I know that some people need like a little caffeine kick to have that happen or something, to be ready for the day. But theoretically, the cortisol increases will get us going and get us ready to tackle what the day has in mind, with then decreasing across the day until late evening hours when we're kind of out of energy and ready to start the process again. Okay, so that's what typically happens under normal circumstances. So this is what happens, and I found this with my own research as well. There's a pretty large body of research about stress hormones in preschool children that finds this interesting alternate pattern. You'll see here there's two lines. The first one, the one with the open white box, this is the measures across the day of children's cortisol levels when they're in a full day preschool or childcare setting. You'll notice the other line, the solid black circle, this is the data that's collected from the same children on days when they are not in preschool or childcare for the full day. This is primarily from full day studies. There is a little indicator that might happen on a very small scale in half day classrooms, but it's much more pronounced on the full day. So what we see here is the start of the day. the patterns mirror each other pretty closely until looks like about 10 in the morning, when children, when they're in childcare or full day preschool, start to show cortisol elevations that peak in the late afternoon before they leave. So instead of just this decrease from morning to afternoon, we have this little camel hump bump across the day. So the mystery is, why would this be the case? Why would children who are in full day preschool programs show this increase, especially when we think about this additional information? When we look at cortisol levels in infants and toddlers, so 1 and 2-year-olds, we don't really see that bump. When we look at stress hormones in early elementary school, so like first graders, we don't see that bump. It seems to be something specific to this preschool time period, ages 3 and 4. Okay, so think about that for a moment, because we're going to work on solving this mystery. If you could enter into the Nearpod box there, what your guesses are for why preschool children would show cortisol increases from morning to afternoon while they're in their classrooms, but not when they're at home. Go ahead, I'll give about a minute here for you to think and then enter into the box. Oh, and there's a message in the chat that some people don't have the Nearpod yet. If you could, Jessica or Jamie, if you could put the link to Nearpod in so that everybody could join. Okay, looks like there's a coming up on half of you have shared so far. Now we're over half. Let me highlight and share some of these responses. This is an interesting one. Changes, transition. It's a daycare setting. Older kids are just getting there from school, and that causes a change. Children are in full day programs. They have a nap or rest period, and they have that spike as they begin. I can't see the full answer. Okay, begin to move again. Okay, that's an interesting question. And there was actually some indication that that could have been part of what was going on. A lot of the programs, since they were full day, they did have a nap in the afternoon. And we found that there was some connection. We ended up having to change or to modify our collection pattern so that we could wait until after the effects of the nap had passed on. Let's see. Okay, so I'm just going to read a few of these. More things going on. They're waking up from nap. Environmental stress. So I'm curious, what do you mean by environmental stress? Oh, in the chat, somebody said stress level might be up in the mid-afternoon because they're ready to be done and go home. It's like, I've been here all day, I'm ready to go. Okay, so that would go along with that. Expectations about routines. Changes in activities in the learning process. Missing their mom and dad, or the feeling safe from at home. Changes of routine. Schools tend to be routine based on home. Isn't always. More structured environment, place of work rather than play. Oh, this is kind of interesting. There's more peers and therefore they feel more pressure. Okay, wonderful, great idea. Maslow, hierarchy of needs type of thing, napping. Okay, wonderful. Okay, thank you for helping to brainstorm and to think about what's possibly going on with this situation. A lot of what you touched on are some of the things that what researchers think may have been going on in this situation. Some of the interesting additional things that we found was that, and this goes along with the idea of social challenges, classrooms with more people, it's not necessarily more children, but more people, tend to have children who show more increases in cortisol from morning to the afternoon. So when we were diving into that a little bit more deeply to look at what's going on with the social stressors, if you really think about it, this age period, the 3 and 4-year-olds in a full day preschool or childcare setting, this may be their first time that they are in a social situation where they have their own clear desires and goals and motivations for a situation, and they are put into a situation with other people who are in the same developmental level, who also have goals, challenges, struggles, things that they want to have in a social situation that are conflicting with each other. And so that tends to lead to social challenges and social struggles. Um, some additional interesting things, and some of the things that to keep in mind. These increases in cortisol, even though they indicate that there could be some stress going on, they're still within the normal range. They could actually be in some ways helpful for children as they navigate social stressors. But the idea that navigating rules, expectations, the expectations of the classroom, the transitions, being told that they have to stop playing in the blocks or painting a picture because it's now time to come to circle time, all of those things that interfere with the goals and the motivation that children have are all things that we hypothesized could be leading to this challenge. So the question is, what does this have to do with what we're talking about today with social studies? In my view, what I'm thinking here is that one of the big ideas of social studies is to help create this idea of group membership, and really ultimately, and we'll talk about this a bit later, empowering children to have a role and have a say in their community and their environment. When children develop these skills, so that when there is the social challenge in the classroom, or there are expectations that are new to them, they have the skills through learning through social studies, understanding their own personality, culture, ideals, and those of other people, and learning the rules and expectations of the classroom to how to get along with other people. Those are the key skills that will help children to interact with other people in this challenging social setting in a way that's less stressful. So with that in mind, let's move forward to understanding the discipline of social studies. Social studies is kind of big. It's quite a broad topic. So to explore this, the next thing is I'd like you to just think for a moment again, and then enter into this Nearpod slide on this collaboration board, what you think, in a nutshell, social studies is. So what is social studies? And I'll give, let me see if I can be like Melissa this morning. I'll give you about 47 seconds to think about and type in a response into the Nearpod board. Okay, so there's a lot about studying the community, studying the environment around us, learning about the world around you. And I would think with that, also our place in the world, how we connect to the world, help them become good citizens, studying the people in the environment, study of self, community, country, culture, diversity, social connections and interactions, citizenship knowledge, cultural awareness and diversity. Social studies helps us learn about cultures, both our own and other people's cultures, talking about this global environment, the global world that we live in, where it is quite interconnected. When I hear that, I think back to when I was in middle school, and it clicked with me that it is studying people and how and where they live affects them. Wonderful. Okay, so there's social expectations and acceptability. Prepare for differences, understanding who we are so that we can understand, and also who other people are, so that we can interact in a meaningful way. You'll see I had a little bit of fun with emojis as I was setting up this Nearpod board. Some of the things that come through is age, education, ability, disability, recreation, arts, culture, traditions, sports, rules, expectations, culture, background. All of these things represented by these little emojis have to do with this bigger picture that you're all identifying here about what social studies and the field of social studies is. Okay, so to explore this a little bit more deeply, we're going to do a breakout group activity. So Jessica, if you could set it up so that we can have about 5 to 6 people in each breakout group. What we're going to do is we're going to look specifically at the idea of culture and societies by having you come up with or create your own societies. So the objective for this is to think about what creates societies, what makes societies unique, what historical, cultural, environmental influences would create societies. So what we'll do is I have here, and hopefully you can all access that. If not, I can pop the link to this sway in the chat, but I'm hoping that you can all access it on your own through Nearpod. So what you will do is in your breakout groups, you will have a series of things, and and it walks through with the sway here. The first thing, you'll have 1 minute to decide as a group what your society that you're creating as your group will be. And here's some examples, some ideas. It could be a society of dog lovers, cat lovers, society of sports fanatics. You could even make it, a little, more specific, society of Green Bay Packers fans, I don't know, society of foodies, society of vampires, werewolves, moms, dads, sisters, brothers, whatever it is, I'll let you decide. You'll have the first minute will be to decide what your culture or your society that you're creating will be. Then following that, you'll have 10 minutes to kind of brainstorm what the history of your society is, how your society of werewolves, for instance, started, if that's what you choose. What's the environment of your society? What are the rules of your society? All of these are in this sway here that you should be able to access here through Nearpod. I haven't actually done this before, but it's like integrated in, so I'm hoping it works. And then we'll finish up the last 5 minutes, and I'll send messages through chat to all the groups. The last 5 minutes is to reflect on your group's discussion about what went into creating that culture or society. So Jessica, if you could go ahead and send them all to breakout groups. And you should, in your breakout group, still be able to access the sway through your Nearpod. And if not, then just follow the link in the chat. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. If you could just take a quick moment here and just put into the chat box some insight that you gained from this activity. What would work in your society? What wouldn't work in your society? Let me know what society you decided to develop. Yeah, the breakout room that I jumped into developed a society that was all moms, and that was made for an interesting discussion. So yeah, take a moment to pop into the chat what your society was and what you learned. Creating a society is more difficult than one might think. Yeah, go figure. Oh, Society of Educators educating educators. Awesome, I like it. Complicated. There's another mom society. Society of hair imposters. I love it. Oh my goodness, I would have loved to be in that conversation. Cat lovers that lived on a farm. So that would be That would be kind of interesting because of the nature of the society that would influence where people in the society would choose to live. It's like, oh, I want to have a place where my cats can really get out and explore and chase things. So yeah, living on the farm. Oh, lots of factors. Book lovers society. The economy would be trading books. It's like, okay, I need some food. I'll share my edition of the Harry Potter series for dinner this week. Wonderful. We're a society of preschool teachers. Nice. One of the things we talked about in the end was that it takes a lot of people and experiences and give and take to be successful. One of the things that came out in the group that I jumped into was, even though we kind of limited it, we reduced some diversity by saying, okay, this society is just made up of moms. We talked about how people's background, how they were reared, things like religious influences or geographic influences, broader cultural influences would still, even within that more homogeneous group of, where everybody has that main thing in common, there would still be enough that would make for quite a bit of diversity. A soccer society, nice. Another soccer society, okay, learned about how soccer has evolved. Interesting, fascinating. Well, I hope that this was kind of a fun little experience for you and really gets you thinking about, well, what is it that makes our society? One of the things that really hits me from this activity too is just how wonderful having such a broad, just such diversity in our society is for making it function. Yes, it adds challenges because there's different backgrounds, different goals in some cases, but taken all together, it's really what makes our society interesting and valuable and make it work. So when we're talking about preschool children and social studies in preschool, this little cartoon kind of sums up a lot of what the goals of teaching social studies to children is really about. The world is so big and I am so small. How could I possibly contribute anything that matters? Then sharing just a little flower, shows that yes, even the small things, has a big impact. Okay. So with that in mind, okay, so we talked about what makes up societies and cultures, and hopefully you got to explore, what people's roles are in cultures. Let's go to a next collaborative board here, or a next share board. If you could type into the box here, what skills, now that you've been thinking about social studies here for a few minutes, what skills do children need to develop in order to successfully participate in society? I'll give you about a minute to think and enter. Communication skills, oh, lots of communication. Collaboration, self-regulation skills, understanding, expectation, and awareness of other people, impulse control, kindness. So a lot of the social skills that we talked about with the approaches to learning back in was it September that we did that one, come into play and overlap. I hope that as you're thinking about this, you're recognizing that there is a lot of overlap and connection between, well, with communication, there's a lot of overlap with English language arts. With self-regulation, problem solving, that has to do with the lifelong learning practices. Social awareness, collaboration. Collaboration is also part of the, the social, emotional, social skills, engagement with others, patience, self-control. Okay, wonderful. So yes, even though the social studies standards, have some, specific social studies focused content, it really is part of this big picture. And so we can kind of think of kind of cross-cutting concepts a little bit here. Even though this is the social studies content area is very specific, there is a lot of connection across multiple other content areas in the standards. Wonderful. Okay, so let's talk about some bigger picture social studies skills. So we've talked about community and community development. We've mentioned in the breakout room, I heard ideas about identity, what makes us who we are, the cultures that we identify with, the background, the heritage that we have. This idea of collaboration that came up with the social studies skills that children need to develop, being able to bring our differences into this interaction where we can all collaborate and produce a workable, functional society or culture, even if it's on a small scale. I like to give the example when I'm teaching courses on diversity in early childhood education. Each child that comes into your classroom has a unique cultural and historical identity. What your role is to celebrate that uniqueness while also bringing together to create a classroom culture where everybody in the class is connecting and collaborating in a way that creates a positive learning environment. So problem-solving skills, that was one that came up. Decision-making skills, that goes back to the earlier, like the first slide or the first Nearpod slide of, when a lot of people were talking about using choices, voting to making decisions. And then this idea of citizenship, my role in making sure or contributing to society and helping to contribute to make sure that our society is working effectively. Wonderful. Okay, so these are some of the bigger picture skills that we want children to identify or to develop. These relate to the social studies standards. The next thing to consider that I wanted to talk about is how do children learn social studies skills? And really to explore this, we need to talk a little bit about, just how children learn in general. This idea of developmentally appropriate practice. So some things to consider when we're thinking about creating lessons and creating learning in the social studies area for children is that we all learn in some very similar ways. First off, exploration and inquiry, asking questions, making those observations. A lot of the skills that we talked about in the science standard training this morning apply to social studies. It's like, why do we do things the way that we do? What would happen if? All of these things encourage children to think and explore. The guidance that we provide as we help children through processes. It's like, oh, you wanted to play with that toy, so you took it away from them, and then they pushed you down. Let's talk about what happened here and why that might not have been appropriate, and let's explore other ways to accomplish the goals or to look at the goals that you have. So providing opportunities for children to experience through trial and error with, we don't want a Lord of the Flies situation. There definitely needs to be a lot of oversight and monitoring on our part as we're working with children, but encouraging those trial and error types of things, exploration, and then brainstorming solutions. So the idea of exploration and inquiry is a big key here. On the second column here, as far as how children learn and what we know about young children, and really, it doesn't just apply to young children, it's all of us, it's the same thing. Repetition and revisiting ideas and experiences helps to develop our synaptic pathways, basically our brain development. And so, yes, if every day for the first 3 months of the preschool year, before we go outside to the playground, we review the rules and expectations about playing on the playground. Yes, that can seem old and it can be very tiring for us, but because of the importance of repetition and connecting our current experience to previous experience, this is still a big key for helping children to understand the social science concepts that we're trying to communicate to them, and to really help to solidify and deepen that knowledge. Okay, so with this, I'd like to talk a little bit about how this connects to the inquiry arc. The idea of the inquiry arc comes from the National Council for Social Studies, as they were talking about how to communicate social studies learning, and in our case, how this applies to the social studies standards developed by the, for the Utah Early Learning Standards. One of the processes and one of the patterns that they've identified as being effective, not just in social studies, but definitely applies to social studies, is this idea of the inquiry arc. Thinking back to science this morning, where a big part of the learning is through experience and through guided questions and through encouraging observation and sense making by making predictions and connection. This same type of pattern applies to the social studies skills. So with this inquiry arc, I'll just talk through some of the patterns here. And I would encourage you that as later on, as you start to develop your professional development for your staff, you keep these in mind and think through how this works. So the first one is developing questions and planning inquiries. So our role is to create situations and create environments where children have the opportunity to ask questions and explore. So I have a few examples here. So why do we have classroom rules? What would happen if there were no classroom rules? What classroom rules should we have for the classroom? How do we decide who gets to play at a center if the center is already full? Instead of the tendency that a lot of us seem to fall back on, where we go in and say, all right, we can only have 3 people in the center. There's 3 people already, you can't be there. Bringing in this idea of inquiry-based learning to encourage thinking, to encourage problem solving, is a big key to help support children's learning and development. The second dimension here is the idea of exploring concepts. So as we're exploring concepts, some of the big concepts identified for social studies are the idea of civics, which is the rights and duties of citizenship. What is my right in this classroom environment? What is my right in order to do things like access materials, to have my chance at playing with different toys or at different centers? The idea of economics, production, consumption, and transfer of resources. This is a little bit tricky in early childhood settings, but there are some basic foundational things that we can do as far as, if there's limited resources, or as far as like sharing the resources that are available in the class. The third thing is the idea of geography. That's the relationship of people and their environments. Somebody mentioned in one of the first Nearpod the idea that they create a map of their community or the neighborhood to help children see the relationship of, say, where they live, where they go to school, maybe where they go to church or where they go to shop, those types of things to help create this connection. On a smaller scale, we can talk about in the classroom about where we need to keep messy items versus, the more quiet items, those types of things. And finally, history, the study of past events. There's a lot of opportunities in the early learning classroom environment to explore these. Okay. So the last thing that we're going to do before we take a break here is we have another Nearpod activity. I would like you to brainstorm, how do you communicate concepts of civic, economics, geography, and or history to preschool children? So go ahead and I'll give you 2 minutes to fill this in. Once you get finished, we'll go ahead and take a break and come back and continue the inquiry arc when we're finished. We'll come back, it's 1:56 now. Go ahead and brainstorm here and then take your break, and we'll come back at 2:05. Well, okay, let's change that, 2:07. That way you have the 2 minutes to complete this activity before you take a break. So we'll come back at 2:07. Oh, I like this one. Through stories and experiences with visuals, to help connect. Wonderful.
Jared, I think when you click on them, it kicks them out of the new pod.
Oh,
So you got to wait for them to type.
okay. Thanks for letting me know. Sorry about if I kicked anybody out. Can you all see some of the responses come in?
I just wasn't able to finish mine.
Oh,
Can you
I'm
go
sorry.
back?
Sorry, what was that?
Can you go back? We still are viewing one and we're unable to type.
Okay. Oh, and that probably kicked everybody out. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Sorry. So once again, after you've contributed to the Nearpod, go ahead and take a break, and we'll be back at 2:07. Okay, so we'll be starting back in about 1 minute. So if you could turn on your camera when you get back to show that you're ready, then we'll jump back into this. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you had a chance to stretch your legs a bit, get up and move, ready to get back into this. So jumping back into the idea of the inquiry arc, the first one was developing questions and planning inquiries. The second one is applying disciplinary tools and concepts. And so that's the activity that we just did here. Then the third dimension of the inquiry arc is evaluating resources and using evidence. Again, mapping onto some of the principles from science this morning. Some things that we can do as adults or as teachers working with young children to encourage evaluating resources is that we can use our skills of self and parallel talk. Basically talking through, I'm doing this to make this, I'm choosing who gets to be my helper today by whatever strategy you use so that we can all have turns to take part in the class. So as we're talking about what we're doing and why we're doing it, that helps to communicate this idea of evaluating sources and using and resources in order to communicate the purpose and the mission of the social studies standards. Some other things that we can do, a lot of, and it was mentioned in some of the Nearpod responses, using stories or activities or visuals to help communicate the ideas of civics and fairness and engagement in the culture and community. Socio-dramatic play is an amazing thing, amazing tool that we have as teachers or as adults working with children in order to help to communicate and gauge children's understanding of the process of creating learning. With socio-dramatic play, one of the things that I love to do in the classroom is if I ever wanted to get an idea of how I'm doing as a teacher, engage in socio-dramatic play with children and say, okay, you're the teacher now and I'm the student, because they will communicate very clearly what they see you doing and from that, what you can do better. Okay, so the final dimension of the inquiry arc here is the idea of communicating conclusions and taking informed action. So this is a little bit tricky. This is a bit tricky in the preschool area, but some of the things that we can do is we can talk about cause and effect. What do you think would happen if, what can we do if we think things aren't fair? What can we do if more than one person wants to play with a toy at once? Let's try your idea and see what happens. This type of process where we engage in joint decisions and joint responsibility for how the classroom operates is a wonderful way to complete this inquiry arc. Okay, so the inquiry arc basically just a way to encourage you to think about planning for children's social studies learning in the classroom environment. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, last May, there was the new early learning standards were approved by the State Board of Education. This is the rollout year, so this is the transition. A lot of you may still be using the old early learning standards, which is wonderful. They don't expire until June, but this is the transition year where hopefully as you and your staff are getting into and exploring the new standards, you're starting to recognize and starting to see what the new standards are meaning. So here is, okay, so here's what this is what the cover for the strategies and activities looks like. Okay, as we're getting into this. Hopefully you all had a chance to jump into the social studies standards with the activity that was linked in the email that was sent out last Monday. But basically, we have the new standards, and they're broken into 8 distinct strands with 13 total standards. It's kind of interesting. Hopefully, as you had a chance to explore those, you took some time to look at the similarities and differences between the new standards and the previous standards. I'm kind of excited about how the standards are linked, and some of the things, the observations that were made earlier about how there is some overlap and connection between the social studies standards and some of the other standards in the new early childhood standards, to really just show about how there is this connection, and we don't isolate learning. We're educating and exploring the learning for the whole child. So with that said, let's get into the standards a little bit deep, a little bit more in depth. There's the link, and you should be able to access the link by clicking on this in your Nearpod. But if not, I'm going to put this in the chat too. There's 2 different ways that you can access. 2 different ways that you can access the standards here. The first is the social studies strategies and activities. This is a document that the writing committee made that is solely focused on the social studies standards. So that's the first link there. The second one is the general early learning standards. This is the one that has all of the early learning standards, of which social studies is one of the total content areas. We're going to do an activity again. We're going to revisit on the next slide. We're going to extend the preliminary activity that you hopefully were able to do with the link in the email before. But if you would pull up on your device either the full document or the social studies strategies and activities, we will get into this next activity. Okay, so this is similar to, well, actually it's the same, other than it's a different standard. I'll give you about, well, let's give about 3 minutes here for you to get into the standards for the social study standards and find which standard. Oh, and I just realized it probably, okay. Yeah, you probably see it down in the bottom. Okay, I bet you can't guess which the standard is. But yeah, if you could take a moment to pull back up the standards and the strategies and activities. Yeah, I just realized with only one choice, that makes the fill in the blank very, very easy. But that's okay. Pull up the standards and we'll use that for the next activity too. Yeah, wow, I feel a little bit silly about that. It's like, oh, of course, if there's only one choice, it makes it really easy to find the right solution. So, first off, how many of you were able to access the fill in the blank activity in preparation for this today? Okay, several of you, okay, great. The purpose for that really was to kind of have a little bit of fun first off, to get into the activities and materials, and then through doing the scavenger hunt, through looking through to find which standard matched up with the description, hopefully that gave you a chance to become familiar in a more deep and recognizable way. So because there's only one standard to fill in the blank, we won't spend much time on this. What we're going to do now is we're going to do another breakout group activity. So Jessica, this time if you could set up 8 breakout groups. What we're going to do is in your breakout group, each breakout group will take one of the different strands. So group 1 will take strand 1, group 2 will take strand 2, all the way up to group 8. I'm posting a link and you should be able to access it through Nearpod, but I'll post it in the chat too. There's a Google document. What you will do is when you go to the Google document, as a group, you'll see that for each strand, there are 3 questions. The first question is, what is this strand? And with this, just kind of like not regurgitating what it means, but or what it says, what the title is, but just kind of in your own words tell what is this strand about? So the strand 1, culture and diversity. What is culture and diversity about? The second question as a group, fill in why is it important? Then the third one will be how do children learn these skills? So what will happen with this is as you're filling in just for your own strand, each group will be filling in on the same document. And so what will happen is you're all creating kind of this handy dandy cheat sheet that has collected in this one resource the information and the overview about each social studies strand. So we'll take, let's see what's the time. Let's take about, let's go about 10 minutes here to give you a chance to get in, and I'll be watching too to see if it looks like we're finishing up earlier, we can cut this short. But within your breakout group, if you would fill in those, and then you will have this link so that you can always refer back to it, if you have questions about what is in each of these strands. So Jessica, if you could, okay, first off, before we do that, any questions about what we'll be doing? Oh, sorry. If not, go ahead, Jessica, and send us to the groups. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I know that wasn't too much time, but it looks like most people were winding up. Let's take a moment. We'll go through each group, and I'd like you to just really briefly, like in 1 or 2 sentences, summarize what you discussed and what you found in your group. So let's go ahead with group 1. Who would like to share about culture and diversity?
So one thing we talked about was just the importance of helping children to see the differences, but also the similarities, being sure that they see that there's lots of similarities in them and not just the differences.
Okay, good. So recognizing that each person is different, but there's a lot of things that bring us together more than separate us apart, and celebrating the differences, but also celebrating the connections. Wonderful. Did you have any, did you have any ideas about best ways to teach that?
We talked some about using stories and books and having families come in and share their experiences, do food experiences.
Wonderful, great.
We also talked about correcting comments or things that come up that sometimes make for uncomfortable situations, but for making sure that we are very intentional on focusing on those commonalities and not allowing those negative stereotypes or any of those things to come into the classroom.
Yeah, it's kind of an exciting time because young children, preschoolers, are starting to get the perceptions about similarities and differences. And so you can kind of see the roots of sometimes you can see the roots of prejudice coming in. And they're at the point where they're still testing out the world, they're still learning about the world. So it gives all sorts of opportunities to discuss and really identify that differences should be celebrated, and we need to make sure that each person is valued, each culture and tradition is valued, and helping to overcome through our discussions and modeling and bringing in books, lessons, discussions, how to avoid the negative effects that come from stereotypes. Wonderful. Good. Okay, group 2, the time continuity and change. I was in that group, but who would like to summarize what we discussed?
I can. So we recognize that things change, and things that change are normal and expected. Like seasons change, like we change, we grow, like our families change when we get new siblings and stuff like that. And we talked about that it's important that it's okay for things to change, because sometimes it's scary. Change is a real scary topic for some young kiddos, and just talking about that, that change is good and it's expected. It's a natural thing. It helps them not to feel as anxious about some of those topics.
Okay, yeah, wonderful. Yeah, just really that change is part of life and it's something to be expected and celebrated. Good. Let's go to the group 3, people, places, and environments.
Okay, ours was people, places, and environments. We talked about it's important so they can learn how to take care and protect their environments. They learn a sense of community and relationship. And it's important to build the background knowledge so that they can make those connections and build on those concepts and vocabulary. And then they learn these skills through discussions with them, with who's in their family, who's in their community, role play activities. Children build from inward out. So we need to make sure they have a sense of themselves and their communities and then build on that.
Wonderful. So some of the ideas from the health standards about people understanding who they are, along with this idea of helping children, as children identify or understand their own identity, that's really foundational in helping them to connect with other people. Wonderful, thanks. Okay, so the next one, strand 4, individual development and identity. Is there someone from?
Yeah, I guess I can do it.
Okay, great.
So really what we talked about is that a child learning about their identity and their person, like their likes and dislikes, is important when it comes to making choices and making decisions in their own life. Things that we can do to kind of help them is, it was brought up like an all about me poster where they have to sit and think, what is my favorite sport? What's my favorite, snack or whatever. But also giving them a lot of choices in the classroom where they can make decisions for themselves and kind of figure out, I really like playing with this one, but not as much as I playing with this toy, stuff like that.
Yeah, it's so valuable for children when we notice, it's like, oh, I noticed that you really like to draw. You've been working hard on that picture. When we help them to, because a lot of times we'll notice that they are engaging in things that they really like, that they value. And as we notice and as we make that connection for them, it can help build their value and help build their sense of identity. Wonderful. There's all sorts of ideas for how to build that. The next one is individuals, groups, and institutions, group 5.
That was us. I'll talk.
Okay, thanks.
It was mostly about how to be a good citizen in your own role and be responsible for yourself. And then also like turn taking, problem solving, being empathetic, and then also being a good citizen in a community or in a group.
Okay, wonderful. So do you have ideas and strategies to how to teach that?
Yes, let me look at our paper. So we talked about giving classroom jobs would be one, so that way everybody's depending on each other to be responsible. During playtime and free play, how you can discuss and ask them how they would solve conflicts rather than just giving them what you think would be a good resolution.
Mm-hmm.
Self-regulation skills and doing reflection when it comes to other problem solving within each other, interpersonal problem solving, taking care of your materials, and then also building time within your routine to practice those things and role playing.
Wonderful, thanks. Okay, let's go to the next one. Group 6, power, authority, and governance.
I can do this one.
Thanks.
It's the study of how people create and change structures of power and authority and governance. And it's important because it helps them understand the roles that each of us play and how we contribute. And they learn about voting for activities and classroom rules. And they also work on posing solutions for classroom problems. And how the children learn to do these is by voting on the rules and activities, developing the classroom rules, participating in jobs in the classroom, and then helping come up with solutions for classroom problems. So we have to first, tell them what the problem is and then go from there.
Wonderful. That democratic participation in the classroom is really a valuable way to help empower children and help them to develop the sense of belonging and ownership of the classroom environment. So wonderful. Okay, group 7, the production, distribution, and consumption. Anybody like to jump in with that one?
I can.
Thanks, Taylor.
Okay, we talked about how this is knowing the difference between what people want and what people need. So we talked about how realizing that things cost money, and so this is why your parents need to go to work. This is why we're here. So your parents, when they do go to work, and learning the value of good work and putting in hard days work, things like that. And to help teach this, we talked about doing classroom jobs and then incorporating a treasure box to start, kind of having them familiar with, oh, because I did this work, then we get paid for it. So understanding that concept.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, the last group, group 8, which is science, technology, and society.
I got this.
Okay, thanks, Penny.
Yep. So the Strand is about our relationship with technology in our society, and it's both simple and electronic technology. Why it's important, we said, is it teaches children, students, how to balance their time. So like media time, how to balance that media time so they don't self-isolate. It teaches all types of technology and its proper use. Learning the positive and negative aspects of technology and how it can affect our students. And then how do children learn these skills? Well, one of the best ways is it needs to be modeled. And when we were talking about it, we were thinking it needs to be modeled in the home as well as in the school. So this might be a good strand to probably even introduce to your parents, either at the beginning of the year about, modeling that, how to use media and things appropriately. Timers are also a great tool to use with students to teach them moderation. So if you were using an app on an iPad, you can say, okay, our time on this iPad during this time is 5 minutes. Once the timer's off, it's a friend's turn. And they're not just spending the whole time on it. So.
Wonderful. Yes, there was a lot of really interesting discussion around the standard with the writing committee, just as far as, recognizing that we live in a technological world. It's something that the children are immersed in. It's something that's important for children, but then it's also important, as you were mentioning there, Penny, the importance of moderation and balance to bring it all together. So, okay, wonderful. Thanks everybody for exploring these standards, and please do use that resource that you all just created. You can download it, print it, save the link, so that you can always go back to refer to kind of this digestion about what the different strands within the standard, what they are about. Okay, so now that we have a firm, solid understanding about the social studies strands and standards, let's move into the next portion, which is really exploring and developing professional development to share with our staffs. So, let's see, some ideas. The objective here is, to prepare a helpful and meaningful training plan for you to deliver the social studies standards to your staff so that they can implement them effectively in the classroom. So what I'm going to be doing, and this is, for those of you who are getting USB credit, this will be one of the things that will be turned in through the Canvas course to get the credit, along with the reflection after you implement this. But this is the template that you'll be using to work through creating the professional development to deliver to your staff. So I'm going to put this in the chat. You can access the link there through Nearpod. or you can access it here. And this is in the shared resources folder for the social studies standards that you'll all be able to access with the link to the slides and the other resources too. So what this template is basically it's a parallel process idea to the process that we usually use when we're doing lesson planning in the classroom. So when teachers are laying out what do the children need for the activities that we do in the classroom, same type of idea, but just at a different level. This is a template that you will be using as you're thinking about the needs of your staff, as well as considerations for what the best ways to communicate the information about the standards to your staff in a meaningful way with professional development. So I'll go through this. Each of these corresponds with the sections on the template. So again, keep in mind, this is the parallel process idea. The first thing is, just like as you're taking on the planning for, lesson planning for the children in the classroom, the first thing is to do kind of a pre-assessment to identify what do your staff already know, what are their strengths as far as teaching and communicating social studies standards, as well as what are some of the areas that they need to expand on or need to develop as they're learning about how to effectively implement social studies standards in their classroom. So basically, what do you know about the teacher's needs and current levels? And the next part, once you have that foundational, and that's similar to like the pre-assessments that you would use in the classroom, kind of the formative assessments as you're using the PEAT data or basic observational data at the first of the year to understand what the children need. This is basically based on your knowledge of what your teachers and your staff need. What will you do to plan and implement the training? So after you have that, the next part is the planning component. So based on the pre-assessment, what will the learning objectives of your training be? So it might be that they're doing really, really well in 3 of the areas. There might be 1 or 2 areas that you haven't really observed or seem to be lacking in the classroom. That would be what you would do, what you would identify as far as what standards you might focus on in your professional development. Then I've been identifying what strategies will be best to help your staff learn the social studies standard content. So that would be kind of basically what we just did with the previous example of getting in and exploring and digesting and discussing it. Then, so that's strategies, and then what activities can you use to support staff in learning how to implement these social standards? So you identified what the needs are, and then you're moving into the planning phase. What am I going to do to communicate this effectively? The next section on the template, ideas for individualizing and differentiation. What scaffolding strategies can you plan to use? A lot of times scaffolding strategies just naturally arise, but there's some things, as you recognize, okay, so here's a teacher who has a really strong background in social studies. Can I use his or her experience to help train other people, for example? Is there some additional resources that I might need to share with people to help understand the ideas of diversity or integrating into the classroom? Those types of things, identifying what scaffolding strategies you might need, as well as what additional supports some of your staff might need. And then finally, what extensions or expansions can be provided to support their generalizability or deeper exploration of the standards. And so this is where you could come into, really bring in the integrated curriculum ideas. So it's like, okay, this particular social studies standards really maps on well with this health standard or this approaches to learning standards or relationship development standards from the lifelong learning practices. This is where you would brainstorm and think about those types of ideas to help connect, those cross-cutting ideas to really make the learning more deep. The next one, and I know we're going fast through these, but these are the sections on the lesson planning template that you will be working on here in just a moment. So you can go back and reference those from the template. The next one is, how will you present this professional development to staff? Is this something that would be best implemented as a coaching strategy? Is it something you'll do as an all staff training? Is there a professional learning group, PLC model where you bring a group of people together to help peer teach. Is there another way that you could present this? Is this something you could do in a newsletter or a webinar or some other method to communicate the content and the strategies to your staff? And then the final thing here on this one is, what will you do to present the training? And as you're doing this, please keep in mind the checklist that we referenced it this morning. Basically, the checklist for each of these planning activities, where you go through and see, have I balanced, or have I identified ways to engage the learners effectively? Have I taken into account individual needs? All those types of things here. So how do I balance instruction, reflection, and practice in the training? So it's not just all delivering information. It's not an information transfer model, but it's more, we're sharing information, but also building in components where people are reflecting on it. People are trying things out. People have perhaps some hands-on experience. However it is that you identify would be the most effective. Then ideas for staff support. How can you help staff identify the social science learning needs of the children in their classroom? So kind of taking it from the staff level to then, how am I going to help support that on the child level in the classroom? How can I support staff lesson planning for including the standards? How I'm going to help translate through my professional development to the lesson planning that the staff make for the children in their classroom, and then what additional supports may be needed for staff as they implement the social studies lesson plans. The next one is building in evaluation or learning checks. How will you know that your professional development was effective? Could it be things like planning to watch for implementation of activities in their lesson plans relating to the social studies standards? Will you be going to the classroom to observe or document implementation? Are there observe or support documentation of child outcomes? What is it that you're going to do to see that if your professional development that you're delivering is being effective? So with that in mind, what we're going to be doing, we'll give you a half hour to do this here. We'll break up into your teams. Basically, that's why you have the number by your name again, to help Jessica as she's breaking you up into your teams for planning. Please download, I think I have it set up with the link to the planning template that you can't get in and edit it. That way everybody has access to it. We're fairly distributing the resource, but please do download it so it's on your computer, and then begin with this next half hour. You might be able to finish it in half hour. If not, then hopefully you'll have a really good start to it. But download that planning template and start working through the sections. I have each of these different headings or these questions that we just ran through quickly, and then there's an open box for you to put in your planning in order to plan for the professional development that you will deliver. So with that in mind, please do access the lesson planning template. Please download it. It shouldn't be editable, as I mentioned, but you can download it so you can edit it on your own. And then, as I mentioned before, for the USBE credit, this will be what you will submit as part of the requirement for getting that USBE credit, which is not the same as the clock hours credit. It's a separate thing for those of you who might be wondering about that. Okay, any questions on what you'll be doing? Okay, so please do download that template. Jessica, if you could go ahead and send people to their different groups so that you can work together as their teams. Those of you who might not be with teams, you can still work together to generate ideas and brainstorm, and we'll come back. It's 2:48 now. Let's give you until, well, I'll check in at 3:15, so that way we'll have a few minutes at the end to process things before we end up. So, okay, thanks everybody. Let's go ahead and head to groups. Okay, welcome back everyone. there's just a couple of things that we need to do. I just want to process a few things before we end. Just a couple of considerations, just on a higher level, just to bring things together here. First thing is, as you're planning for the professional development for your teachers, it's really important that you help to communicate that teachers need a sense of security and belonging too. That connection and that support is something that goes a long way in supporting and strengthening teachers. The next thing is that teachers need the belief that their students are far more capable than they, meaning their students here, and most others believe them to be. Basically, our children are amazing, and they can do a lot, they can learn a lot. So having appropriately high expectations is very important to communicate as you're communicating the professional development to them. And then the disciplinary inquiry-driven classroom. Those are kind of the inquiry arc. Encouraging children to explore, question, using guiding questions to teach. Is a very effective and important way to communicate the social studies standards and themes to children, as well as to the teachers that you're developing. Okay, so I think I'll skip this one in the interest of time. I think we'll just do this review here quickly. Okay. So how are you feeling about the 8 strands of the Utah Social Studies Early Learning Standards? Can you give thumbs up, thumbs down? Okay, so there's a lot of thumbs up. Okay. Hopefully through this activity, hopefully you have a deeper understanding and you've had a chance to explore a little bit more. Think about what plans you've begun making to prepare your teachers. As I jumped into the different breakout rooms, I know that a lot of you, there are a lot of other things going on, which is quite understandable, but hopefully you have a foundation, and hopefully you're at least having the opportunity to think and reflect as you're moving forward in preparing for delivering the professional development. Next thing, do you have the resources you need to implement your plans? Are there additional resources you need? Is there additional information that you would like from us, that you would like to reach out to us? That's great. There is a shared resources folder that you will all have access to, that will have the slides here, as well as some additional resources that you can use. And then finally, how will your teachers' learning styles and needs affect your plan? As I jumped into some of the different breakout groups, that was kind of a theme that came up with the planning template, is that reflection component as you are preparing to deliver the professional development. And then after delivering it, instead of just saying, yay, that went really well, celebrating the success, but also saying, okay, well, what made it go well? What can we do to improve? And so please keep these things in mind as you're working. Okay, so the next steps, those of you who are doing this for USBE credit, hopefully you had a chance to fill out the survey at the beginning of the day. If not, reach out to us, and so we'll be sure to add you to the Canvas course, where you can access the Dropbox to complete the assignment. Complete the planning template that you started with this planning time that we gave you this afternoon. Then after you have planned for the professional development, then the next step logically would be to present it, communicate it to your staff in whatever way you plan and see appropriate. Then after that, complete the professional development implementation reflection activity. We have the link to that here. It's also, it'll be in the Canvas Dropbox. Basically, this is a way for you to really look at some of these questions about what went well, what did I learn, what did the staff learn, what are the next steps, what do we need to do differently in order to do this continuous quality improvement to help guide this continuous quality improvement with our staff and with our programs. For those of you who are doing USBE credit, if you're just doing the seed hour credit, you don't need to worry about it. You'll submit all of these documents in the Canvas assignment Dropbox. And then this will be in the shared folder. These are the references. So, okay, so we do have a survey, an end of the day survey for you, but before we give you a chance, we'll give you some time to fill this out before 3:30, so you can move on with things here. But are there any last questions or comments, observations that anyone would like to share with the group? Let me open up the chat so I can see if anything. Okay, if not, then either Jessica or Jamie, whoever has the link to the survey for the day, can you put that link? Oh, it looks like Jamie put the link to the survey, the end of the day survey for both the morning session, the science standards implementation, and then this afternoon, the social studies implementation. If you will complete that form, we would really appreciate it. Please help us so that as we prepare for the final standards implementation training coming up on March 5th, we can take the feedback that you give to help improve and guide the training for the future. So
Jared, I would just like to add, if they will click on Jessica's, I was giving them the edited version. And they're not going to want the link that Jessica added.
Okay,
so
thanks.
You guys can please click on the one that Jessica added. That would be great. And then I just want to say thank you again for all of your participation today. It has been a great day for us.
It's been an exciting day. It's been a long day. There's been a lot of information, a lot of discussion. It's been wonderful, but yeah, it's been a great day. So thanks all of you for joining us. And then once you're finished with the survey, you're free to go. Thanks again, everybody.